Alright guys, it's Zach here. I'm doing a voiceover for this video just to make it a little faster. You can see my trigger contacts are working fine. I'm just looking at them. And you can see the spring's on straight. You need to make sure your spring is straight on the inside. See how mine is straight? It can be angled depending on if you put it on the wrong way. Also, this is very important because your tap-up plate can only have it going straight. See? So if it's not straight, you're not going to get a perfect moving back forth motion. It's going to be rubbing up against that spring. You can see that. Moving on here, trying to see what else we're going to be doing. Oh, I'm talking about the back. Please, any spring guides, anything that locks into the back of the spring, please screw it in. It's important. You don't want your thing getting messed up. Now here's the motor plate, and you can see I used some silver permanent marker to mark where the motor height adjustment is. I'm going to take this apart and show you how to do a proper shim, which is probably one of the best shims I've ever put together. Even though it doesn't sound perfectly quiet, there's a lot of variables for that, but I'm going to show you how to make a perfect shim job. Sometimes it comes down to the anti-rosa latch is pretty loud, as well as the depending on what's inside. If you got springs that go to the gears and so forth, I don't have a quiet gear set. This is just our stock gears from VFC. So we're going to go ahead and get inside here. Now I take off both sides evenly because sometimes these screws, I know the VFC ones are steel plated, but like Echo ones and so forth, they break pretty dang easily, so you'd be pretty pissed off. So I evenly take them out. Now this is important. You can see where the motor adjustment is. It kind of just flushes with this motor right here, and you don't want to scratch the bottom of your plate because what happens is that metal can short to the other wire. Also, you can see I use the plate to move the wire away so I can screw it in properly. See, I'll twist it and then push down in there, and that's flush. Bam. Okay, so when taking out the motor connectors, be very gentle, very careful. I usually use a little hex and don't scratch anything, because the more and more you mark up your wires, you're going to need to replace them eventually, so you're not going to be happy with that. Be very careful not to knock anything else out of the motor. Move them to the side and push the motor out. If you need to use pliers to pull the motor out, be very gentle. Try not to scratch the metal upon metal. Just grab the plastic end. Okay, now we've got the wires in there, and I want to show this. See the hole down there in the middle? It's completely allows the motor's pinion to go through and the spring to properly compress in. If you do not screw in those screws down there properly, let's say you have them slanted or probably just slanted is what's going to make them in the way. If they're in the way, you cannot do your proper motor adjustment, and you'll have issues the whole time, and you can't figure out why you can't motor adjustment. There's another reason why you have a motor adjustment problem, but I'll get to that very soon. So take these out. Make sure that your pistol grip is flush to the other or to the part of the gearbox. That, or if you could see the other part of the bottom receiver, make it flush to that, but it only goes to the gearbox on mine right here. Oh, actually, you still have the gearbox and the external, the bottom receiver still right now. Also, be careful not to strip your screws. Use a big screwdriver if you need to. I use a bigger one usually. Be very gentle here. You don't want to rip out anything. These wires are not made to last forever, so I've had to replace mine before. Never want to replace again. It's just a pain and time taking. So you can see the two holes here. I'm talking about making it flush. It needs to be flush. Make sure it's all the way in tight. You want to have the best motor adjustment, so you need to make sure it's in there flush. Make sure that hole, that middle hole right there, has nothing blocking the way. Not even a wire inside the gearbox. You want nothing blocking. Alright, now the best way to have a good shim job here is to, there's three ways. One, you've got sight, hearing, and touch, but the best way above all is seeing it. I say that from experience because you can touch it and sometimes it feels like it's right, but then when you close the gearbox, it's not really. You need to completely screw it closed because the torque alone can push the gears harder together, and so you need to make sure you do that. I'm removing the screws right now so we can get into the gearbox so I can show this. But the other one is sight. Hearing, it's kind of hard to tell, but sight for sure. You can see the gears moving up and down with the screwdriver if you're pushing them through the bearings or the bushings, whichever you have. I have bushings here, you can see. So I push these down so the gears don't get stuck, and I pull this up. Okay, now the thing I don't like about this set, see, I've got the bushings, or excuse me, the shims on this side that go on top. The reason for that is there's springs on these two gears right here, and I really do not like these, but one of them I cannot remove. The other one I can, but it would take so many shims because see how high it goes up? It's ridiculous. It would take so many shims to fill that. And this one right here I can't remove because the shims won't sit properly. So it's the best you're going to get right there, but with a different gear set you could do better. Taking out the anti-reversal latch. Also should make sure your anti-reversal latch works. Pull the spring back a little harder if you need to make it stretch so it locks on properly. Taking all the gears out. You definitely want to start with the spur gear. No matter what. I don't care. Somebody says bevel gear. Bullshit. The spur gear right away. Put the spur gear in. Now you add some shins on the bottom until it doesn't grind. You can see right there. Now the top of that, pause for a second here. Now to do with the top of that, what you're going to do is, let's say I don't have that spring right there on top of my spur gear. I remove that. I keep putting shims until it can't no more. I usually put more than the gearbox can close. So if you put down the gearbox and it can't close, you know you need to remove one. So remove one and try to spin the gear with it screwed. If it's screwed and it won't spin, you need to remove another one on the top of that spur gear. And you repeat until it actually moves quite easily. Now it might feel at first kind of moves, but you're not sure if it's moving great. Well, remove one more and see the difference until you know when you touch it and you feel it and you see it moving with your finger the best way than the previous way, then you pick that way. And that's how many shims you would have on top of that spur gear. Now I use a GMP shimming set, and it's precision like, so it gives me 0.1, 0.2s, but there's also steel which can give you 0.3s, 0.5s. I suggest buying both the sets because of problems like what I'm having. I have to switch out the gear because the GMP copper shims are a little soft and they kind of bend easily, so they don't fit properly on there on those certain spots. So you need a different shim. However, some people will say, well, that won't happen because, you know, not all gears are like that. If you're going to be doing shims all the time, have the different sets. It just makes more sense. Or change out the gears, I guess. But I'm not going to change out the gears if they're good. So we're going to move on here. Now, when we put in the bevel gear next, we need to make sure it has enough shims that it's higher than the spur gear, so that it's close to flush, but not exactly. It needs to be just a little bit because you want to put that grease in between on your gears. So now you can see mine goes over. It's okay if it goes a little higher. The difference is very slightly different. It's when it goes extreme that you're going to have yourself breaking down teeth. So you want to make sure you're very close. You can check by trying to feel, but again, this comes down to sight and seeing. Seeing the best is, oh, it's got some kind of clearance. Now I'm going to pause here for a second because I want to explain that I'm not going to completely adjust the bevel gear yet. First, I'm going to completely adjust the sector gear. Reason being is just to have it there. If I've got shims on either side of the plate of the gearbox, and I don't want to lose those. It's easier just to put them on the gear, and it's already done for. So this is why I go straight to the sector gear. However, you really do not have to do the sector gear right now. Preferably, just remove all the shims if you decide not to. I will come back to the bevel gear and explain how to finish it properly. So right now we're going to continue with me finishing the sector gear first, and it will basically be like the spur gear. I'm going to make sure that it has clearance from the cutoff lever, which is the this gray metal thing that moves back and forth I will be pointing at in just a moment. But also it has the clearance from the bushing or ball bearing. I have the metal bushing, so I don't have any worries because it's actually flat with the gearbox. So any shims, it clears that, and then the spur gear has to clear it, so I can see that. I will show that I can see it clearing it. And then I will again close the gearbox and put a lot of shims on top of the sector gear until it cannot move, and slowly remove them, closing the gearbox and screwing it again and slowly removing until it's finally got the most shims it can on the top of it. So it's going to have shims on the bottom and the top, just like the spur gear. Spur gear will be ready and the sector gear will be ready, and then I'll move back to the bevel gear. So here we are, we're going to put this in the sector gear. Now here's the clearance of the cutoff lever right here. You got to be careful of. So you want to get above that so it's not grinding on that. You want to be grinding on the bushing or the spur gear, or excuse me, the spur gear, because I'm holding the sector gear. See right there, you can tell it's not grinding. Now see, from this angle it's hard to tell from the feel, and it sounds like it's grinding. So what you need to do is put your finger on the middle of it and check with movement here. See? Different. Because that's how it's going to be in the gearbox. It's going to have support in the middle. So checking clearance, you want to make sure you look at the section for clearance. Not sure what I'm doing right now. So that's cleared. Oh, I'm talking about the bushings on the top here. Now I'm going to make the decision to put the sector gear back in, because I'm going to realize, oh, I know that bushing or that shim is going to fall out. But here I think I'm showing that you want to tighten every time you put it down a gear. That way you can check to see if the gear moves with your hand. On the inside, there's different places you can even use a screwdriver and see if it will rotate. Now see, there's very little movement on the bevel gear that goes up and down. That is something necessary to have. You want the slightest amount of movement. I'll explain why later. Okay, I'm going to remove this real quick. Probably going to put the sector gear in now. Yeah, we're getting ready to do the bevel gear, so I'm not sure why I brought that out. But you definitely want to make sure the wires are flush to the gearbox as well. You can see that the motor's pinion will be able to go through very easily. It won't run into a wire. Also the motor plate, make sure it goes on correctly. Now I already marked mine at the bottom. You can see I had it perfectly marked, but we're going to go over that right now, show how to do that. This is explaining if the gears get too tight, too close together, they won't move. If they get further apart, they will move with less tension. So we want to go ahead and get this ready. Now this is explaining, we need to pause for a second so I can explain this best. Now this is why I start with the spur gear instead of the bevel gear. There are different ways to basically shim the bevel gear, but the bevel gear really kind of has to be shimmed last, simply because if you shim it, let's say without the wires, on the opposite side of the gearbox, what happens is the motor adjustment is not always the same with the wires. So it's best to, even if you were to put it on this side, it's kind of hard to see that upward and downward movement. So the best I have found for myself from using and doing maybe about 20 gearboxes like this is to close up the gearbox and see it. If you can't see it, you are going to mess it up. So talking about these two here, people like to have it straight on, as close to the top of the gear's teeth with the pinion, so it's almost flush, wheel to wheel basically, or gear to gears, the teeth. But if you look at these two pieces individually, these two parts, the pinion is a little bit of an angle. It doesn't have straight teeth, and you can see that clearly from this picture. The same goes with the bevel gear. Its teeth are, well, they're straight, but they're at an angle. So they're at an angle on both of these pieces. Now, trying to come in straight exactly, it's pretty difficult to do because there are how do I say this? There are factors with each gearbox. One being the metal bushings or the ball bearings, how far they come in, how many shims, and how much height the gear has. So because of this, it's very hard to have it perfectly straight onto it. The best thing to do is adjust the motor plate all the way down so that the motor is far, far away from this gear, and push it up until it aligns with it. Now what that means is that we have to have the proper amount of shims that we can see right when it touches this bevel gear, that the bevel gear moves up, so that we can have it perfectly aligned. Now the only way to do that is if the bevel gear is perfectly shimmed itself. So to do this, we keep adding shims on the bottom of the bevel gear as we close it up and screw it together. Now you could do this first, but I suggest with the spare gear just because it's everything finished and it's a pain in the ass to pull it out. And what happens if you drop the shims or something happens? Okay, people say preference, but again, just have it done. If something happens, you'd be happier that you're finished at the end instead of having something bad happen. So again, when I say bullshit, I really mean that. Start with the spur gear as the lowest and work up. Now we work on this bevel gear last because it's the most important. If we make any changes to the height of this, we can move the spur gear up too. But once we do that, we have to move up the sector gear. Now, if the spur gear and the sector gear are already perfectly aligned, this is why I prefer this way too. If they're already perfectly shimmed, excuse me, you can just remove a shim from the top and put it on the bottom on both of these. And if they're the same number, if they're 0.1s at the end or 0.2s, I always start out with 0.2s until it gets tight, and then I go to 0.1s so that I have a very close precision. But if they are the same number on the top, when you switch them to the bottom of the gear, it will be the same shimming job between the two gears. So it's a good thing to have it that way. It's already finished. You don't have to worry about shimming back and forth. Now, talking about how to do this, we're going to go ahead and show in the video. So the bevel gear needs to be high enough up that the motor adjustment works. That's the thing. It needs to be properly like that. I'm going to try to show this best on this part of the video. Also, for the time being, since we're just going to be waiting and I'm showing that what I've already stated, any comments that I'm getting, I'm not actually able to see anymore. I pretty much need personal messages if you guys want to contact me. I don't know what YouTube is doing, but I cannot check through the comments. It is really messed up. I can't even check other videos' comments. It's getting bad. So YouTube's still messing around with their stuff. So let's go ahead and get back into this bevel gear. Excuse me. My trigger keeps getting out. it wants to come out. Now if you have problems closing the gearbox, you can use a screwdriver or a little hex to kind of push the top of the gears to fit aligned. I think I'm going to zoom out here so I can show. Put that sector gear back in. See, I check to make sure my shims are there. I don't want to lose any. And then I have a little bit of a pain putting them on because of those stupid springs. I really hate that the VFC decided to use springs. At first I thought that they were nice, but then when I checked the gears and I checked the shimming of it, actually the springs are kind of loose, so it could still wobble. So I put more shims regardless on top of the gearbox shell. That's why when I push it down, the gears are tighter still. Just tight enough. They have to be just tight enough. That's the key here. And I'm having a little problem closing it because those shims keep getting moved. See, this is why I would prefer to just get rid of that stupid spring, but I can't. So eventually I get it on there. And there we go. Now see, I'm feeling to see if it moves very, and it also locks in better. So you can hear it spin. Now if you have the anti-reversal latch on, it gets a little bit louder and it won't spin as easily. But this is just showing that it's working. So I'm going to go ahead and screw this in real close and use two hands. It's a lot faster. You'll see I'll use the top and then my left hand to use the bottom. If you have a spring, you will want to hold the gearbox first with one hand and then use two hands after you get a few screws in. Now this is torquing it together, so if the shims are too much, then the gears will not move, and that's how you'll know if you've got them aligned, if you add too much. See, you hear that? It's perfect. Because I already know if I put any more on top, it will not move at all. Okay, here's where the bevel gear has a little bit of play. Now I'm giving it a little bit of play just so I can get the proper motor height adjustment. Now some people drill a hole on top of their gearbox so they can see the proper motor height adjustment. I prefer to see it in a different way. I like to see the gear move upwards, meaning that it's perfectly lined there. Now remember, these two parts, the bevel gear and the pinion gear, are at an angle. Now make sure your pistol grip is in there flushly all the way down. If you don't push it all the way down, you start screwing it in, your motor is going to be up higher than it's supposed to be. So push it all the way down. Make sure the screws go in straight, both of them. Whenever they use two for something like this, you should use the two screws, because if you just use one, you could break the screw from the torque of the motor, so that little spring on top of the motor. So you want to be careful. I don't know how well your parts are made. If they're a piece of junk and a screw breaks because of that reason, then that's the way it goes. There's not much I can do about that. So at least I'm giving advice how to not get yours screwed up. Alright, let's check this out. Now you can see it's flush and there is nothing down there, so the motor is going to go in there nicely. Now my two wires come in the back like this, depending on how your motor goes in, but you can see mine go in the back like this, and the red is on the right. So black goes in first, and then the positive wire, which is red. Now I'm showing as you push the motor in, you can see that bevel gear go up. Just very slightly. You can see it go up. So that means that I'm not actually going into the bevel gear anymore. If it doesn't go up at all, it could be locked onto it where it looks kind of slanted, or it could be too high up and your motor's not even touching it. So you want to check both these. Now you put these on with your hands. I don't ever put it on with pliers, because pliers have teeth sometimes, and those teeth ruin the wire. Alright, so now I'm going to go ahead and close this up. We're just about done. Now once you do have it aligned and the motor does spin, it will sound where you can't hear any screeching that's loud, and at the same time you won't hear where it's stuck. It's like a high screech where it's loud because it has a lot of movement, and it grinds on that gear if you don't have it perfectly aligned to it. The other sound is when it gets too close up high, it jams. So that's why I will start all the way down and move up the motor plate. Just keep moving it up until you see it contact with that bevel gear, and then you go down slightly, like the slightest amount. Now if you really want it, you don't want any movement in there at all, you could go back in and add a 0.1 shim to make it the most perfect, but I leave just a tad bit of movement. Bevel gear seems to have just the slightest amount of movement anyways. So you can see it goes up and down. So what I'm going to do is keep tightening until it just doesn't. Just at that point that it doesn't, you want to stop. So I already marked mine, so I know exactly where that point is. So I'm just going to go straight to that point. Right now I'm not at that point. You can see I'm less. So you'll see the bevel gear go up a little bit, just like the slightest bit. It's hard to do with the camera angle. So the reason I don't have that all the way shimmed is because I'm trying to see the proper motor height adjustment. See, it's not moving at all now. And I know it's not too tight because if I tighten any more, I already marked it from earlier. So now it's ready to go. And that's how you would do it. Thanks for watching, guys. You'll see here I checked the gears. They can't move, of course, because the pinion gear is tight. But if we have any questions, go ahead and send me a private message. Simply because of the comments, I'll go ahead and hit you with the fist, and I will catch you guys later. Hopefully this video helped out a lot of you.